property management is expensive. It's not cheap, right? And some months your property manager is going to do nothing. But when the roach infestation or the dead body comes, you're prepaying in a lot of ways.
One thing, Donnie, is very interesting is that whenever I talk to somebody and they're considering buying their first rental property, their biggest hesitation is having to deal with tenants. It's such an unknown. They're scared of it. And so that's quite often why people hire us as property managers, because they don't know how to deal with tenants, or they're scared to deal with tenants, or they just have no idea what they would do if the unthinkable happened, like someone didn't pay rent on time. I mean, honestly, that's sometimes their biggest fear is, what do I do if they don't pay me? But I think today we might, change that narrative a little bit and talk about a few things that would totally scare people to death. But at the same time, you got to consider this in the context of, what we do, how we do it, human behavior, and really at the end of the day, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? Maybe today you'll hear in your mind what might be the worst thing that could possibly happen, but we've been through all this stuff for real and seen it firsthand. And so I think we can sit back now and laugh about it, even though at the time maybe we weren't laughing so much. At the end of the day, these are all great stories and all part of property management, really all part of the human experience in dealing with people.
That's exactly right. Things that scare you, I was thinking about not getting paid being your worst. That might be the worst nightmare if you haven't bought correctly, and if you've made your purchase decision on a razor thin margin, right, with a projection that doesn't account correctly for the fact that people will default on rent or there will be damages, and then someone all of a sudden doesn't pay their rent. Well, that is petrifying. I mean, we experienced that really early on, and we have a couple stories related to that. But so don't create your own anxiety, don't create your own problems by buying wrong to begin with. If you buy too narrowly and then you go ahead and there is a default, that can really ruin your day. That can ruin your whole future. And before you've even had a chance to experience some of these other really fun things that we've experienced. So don't do that to yourself. And you'll experience a far better time in real estate, I think.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing is that quite often the first time that we're tipped off that something might be up at a property is when someone doesn't pay. You think, oh, wait, where's the rent this month? Let's call up this tenant, see what's going on. Oh, they're not answering their phone. They're not responding to emails or texts. Let's drive by the property. And then, wow. Recently we've had this experience, first one on the list down in Brandon. It's a community just south of Tampa, a little suburb there. And we bought this great house down there. It was a really good deal for us. Bought it through some of our wholesale connections. And we got it renovated and rented really quick. We thought, man, this tenant was well qualified. We had his bank statements. We knew he made good money, had good credit, had good references and all of that. Drove a truck, so we knew he wasn't going to be home very often. Not put a lot of wear and tear on the house. Thought, man, this is great. Then he bounced his first rent payment. Easy explanation. He was out of town. Maybe he missed a digit on his bank account. We were like, okay, no problem. We'll give you another shot. Finally, second payment comes through. Third payment comes through. Fourth payment, bounced. Fifth payment, bounced. Okay, so now we're starting to wonder what is going on. No contact. Guy doesn't speak any English. So we drive by the property.
Yeah, and the fact that he didn't speak any English was not a huge problem initially. It's not a big red flag because, we have interpreting software and we have realtors sometimes who come in and will interpret for us. And so we moved this renter in after a clean screening because he was somewhat represented by a realtor who, to a degree or so, at least in our minds, was vouching for his credibility. And so there weren't a lot of red flags initially. Maybe early on a red flag that existed was that he bounced his first rent check as well, and immediately made that right. But that could have been a red flag that we interpreted. But I wouldn't say that we saw a ton. But man, when we showed up to that house and we saw that the grass was starting to grow, so alarm bells are starting to go off. It's like maybe this house is just abandoned. Maybe he just moved out of this house. So, but garage door was also like askew. Looked like someone had like torqued it a little bit and was sitting half open at the bottom. Like, that's a bad sign. And so we go walked around the whole property. Every single window is closed tight. We really can't see anything except there was a crack in one blind, and we saw that it looked like the house was vacant. So we said, let's try to get in. So we try all the windows. We're getting ready to leave because like nothing that we're doing is working. And then we try the front door handle, and the front door swings open like the Haunted Mansion. In we go. Like, oh great! Like all else fails, try the front door. We walk in. The house itself looked okay. I mean, there was like just junk left around, so there wasn't anything bad until we round the corner and look ahead and try the handle on one of the bedroom doors, and it's locked. And we're like, that's weird. But right beside it, there's another bedroom door, so we walk into that. And so what unfolds in front of us kind of in slow motion is that like every piece of drywall is gone from this bedroom, from these bedroom walls. And also the closet that used to be there was also gutted. It was gone too, and the drywall was removed so you could walk through from one bedroom into that bedroom that was sealed. And then we noticed that all the electrical wires were hanging down, kind of suspended from where they used to be in drywall. And add to that, each of the windows in the bedrooms were covered over and sealed with drilled in and finished drywall. So they had created this totally black dark room, impenetrable from the windows. The blinds still sat up on the other side of the drywall that was nailed to the walls and all caulked perfectly around. So from the outside, you couldn't tell anything was going on. But unmistakably, this was a dark, dark room where everything was gutted, carpets were gone, it was down to a concrete floor. And I was still not cluing in. I'm like, man, what were they doing in here? And I think Chase finally noticed it when he saw like the potting soil on the ground, right? It was that right. the telltale sign?
Yeah, the potting soil and the extra air conditioning ductwork that was laying in the living room.
Yes.
You know, it's like, I remember we came in through the garage first, right? We couldn't get into the house. In the garage, I see rolled up carpet over on the right-hand side. Right. I'm like, that's interesting. That looks a whole lot like the carpet that used to be in the house. I wonder why it's sitting out here in the garage. And the next thing we notice, there is a hole in the master bedroom punctured all the way through the exterior block wall. And it's stuffed full of Spanish moss. And we're like, what in the world? Did a creature like burrow through concrete block and bring its nest into this hole? Like, what is going on here? You know, it didn't really cue in at first that, oh wait, this is a ventilation hole. Someone's, poked in the side of the house to vent this room from when they're growing marijuana. I mean, crazy. Never seen anything like this before. We've seen grow houses before, but we've never seen them like in progress. Like, I think this one was getting to the point where they were getting ready to grow.
Yeah, maybe, right? Or is it possible? I don't know. Maybe they had already grown a crop and they were gone, or who knows what it was. But, we went and knocked on the neighbor's house. Neighbors, have you ever seen these people? Like, no, never seen them ever. Said one time in the middle of the night, someone pulled up in a big truck to this house, and they tried to get in, and it looks like they couldn't get in through the garage, and I heard them yelling, and they damaged the garage. So they had a little bit of context for why the garage was damaged. But here's a tenant who was never seen by his neighbors. There was never any physical, obvious signs of problematic things going on. Rent was, up until a point, getting paid. There was no alarm bells going off in our minds until the rent alarm bell was registered.
But this is like an HOA community. I mean, like, I was shocked when we pulled up to the house that no one had reported us, We hadn't received a violation. None of the neighbors had called. Like, it was really strange because it was obvious this house was being neglected. From the outside at least, but I mean, once you go in, it's a whole other story.
Yeah.
The only sign,
miracle.
Yeah. And the only sign someone had been there was like a frying pan on the stove, some empty beer bottles, and like a little futon that was in the living room. And that was it.
It was barely used at all. And it was clearly abandoned at this point. So, what do we do? Like, we have in Florida a pretty prescribed eviction process to go through. You've got to notice a tenant, you've got to tell them they have 3 days to vacate. You can, then submit that paperwork to judges, or you can go to attorneys, or you can go to the court yourself and file for possession of the property. But this property was clearly abandoned. Nothing was left in it. It was also clearly in danger. It had been vandalized with drywall being removed and electrical problems. So at that point, we just take the house back. What we found that the best thing to do there is get the locks rekeyed ASAP, turn the power back on in your name, Really take control of the house, really secure it again. That way, open the blinds up, take the blocks off the window. People know they should not be going back in there again when whoever was the bad player who was doing all of that. And we took it back. And, we're a week into it or so, Chase, and how's it looking?
Yeah, they're getting going, but we've had a hard time turning the power back on because this tenant left Tico with an $850 bill that they haven't paid.
Grow house special.
Yeah, that's 1 month of grow house right there. Yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable.
So we're sorting that out. Should have power on today, hopefully. But yeah, we've already done the trash out. Some cosmetic work has started. The framing's already back up in the room. Drywall's off the wall. So it'll be a fun little project, but we'll get it re-rented really quickly.
Well, one thing you mentioned in all that is how landlord-friendly Florida seems. During the height of the coronavirus, was there ever an eviction moratorium here in the state?
Yes, there was an eviction moratorium.
How long did it last?
A while, actually. I think probably lasted close to 8 months.
Okay.
Am I right on that remembrance?
Yeah, I think it was I think it was almost a year, actually, by the time they finally lifted it. They kept extending it over and over and over again. And there was a federal one and a state one. The state one went away. I think the federal one kind of stayed intact.
Yeah, right.
And so nobody knew what to do, really.
That's right. It was. A council would issue weekly updates on what the latest was on whether or not you could evict. And what we found was that you could still evict even while the foreclosure moratorium was going on. For people who were damaging the property or who were violating rules, you could evict those as normal. But folks who were just delinquent on rent, there was a moratorium on that. Mm-hmm. And we found there was so much money flowing through our system, federal money and local subsidies, that it was one of the best collection periods for us during that COVID period. Right. Yeah, so very low default rate on residents. But your point is taken. Florida is a relatively landlord-friendly state. You can get a home back in 30 to 45 days if your tenant defaults or does damage.
That's pretty huge.
It's a big deal.
Did I mention to you guys that in California and LA, they're still under eviction moratorium?
No way.
Today. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, they're probably doling out a lot more aid, too, out there. I don't know. Maybe not, but, they tend to err on the side of subsidy.
Yeah,
And do you know how long it takes to get repossession of a property on the West Coast?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
I actually, thankfully, I don't own any investment property in California.
Yeah.
I'd probably shy away from that. Best case scenario, I'd probably think 3 months.
Yeah, I thought that's what I thought too.
9 to a year.
Yeah.
That was probably what I was thinking. I got hit pretty hard during the end of the coronavirus because where I was invested in Detroit, they still had the moratorium in place. So it was about a year for me until I was able to get my tenants out. So yeah, you got to bite the bullet once in a while.
Well, it's interesting because in the 17 years that we've been real estate investors, and not only just in the properties that we own, but in all the properties, the thousands and thousands of homes and apartment buildings that we've managed, I can't recall the exact number, but I would say off the top of my head, the number of tenants we've actually had to forcibly evict from a property is probably less than 20.
It's not a huge number.
Most of the time they leave voluntarily, at least here in Florida, because they know what's up. We've had a handful of them, though, that have pressed their luck, taken us to mediation even, and tried to fight the issue. And, best of all is when they're really belligerent, and they're really like, I'm sticking it to the man, and then you get to show up with the sheriff. And around here it's Deputy Gordon, one of my favorite guys. He's this big, muscular black dude that shows up in his uniform and helps you get your property back from people that don't deserve to be there.
Yeah.
And boy, that's a fun day when someone's been, cussing you out, telling you, how terrible you are as a landlord and refusing to follow any rules or pay any rent, even though they have money, and you get to go with Deputy Gordon.
Yeah, he's your best friend that day.
He is.
Yeah, default from renters is, I mean, early on, that was one of my biggest fears, because we are very tight on money. And I think a lot of investors enter the game, they don't want to be, angry landlords. We don't want to stick it to renters. I think many people go in as very compassionate people. I think we set ourselves the ideal of we're gonna really help out the communities. We're gonna be compassionate. We're gonna save Tampa one low income duplex at a time, right? I mean, our social conscience was really high, and I would say most landlords, certainly most Gen X or millennial landlords, are kind of that way. I mean, none of us. I don't know many jerks, right? Who are landlords, and so some tenant comes to you and they're like, their mom is really sick in the hospital, and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I'll work with you this month. And then the next month, it's like, I had some giant medical bill. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened. I'm so sorry. Month 3, my car is broken. It's like, oh my, I can't, wow, what a bad spate of luck, right? And then month 4, my mom almost died again. I'm like, again? Your mom has died again?
Exactly.
Your mom died again? How's that even possible? And eventually you're like, wait, something's going on here. But it took us a few of those before we decided, we're not going to be such bleeding hearts anymore. Many renters are serial gamers of the eviction system. And they know exactly how long they can avoid payment. They know exactly how long the eviction takes. They don't want to meet They don't want to meet Deputy Gordon either. So they're out the day before Deputy Gordon shows up. They know how to do this. They bring enough money for deposit and first month's rent, and they're out. You gotta know that happens, and be socially compassionate, but also be somewhat shrewd, because that person is everywhere in Tampa and every community. You just got to watch out for them.
And one of their names was Shamika.
Yeah, that's right.
Shamika was this woman who said her mother died twice, I believe, and her aunt.
And her aunt died.
And her sister, and her cousin, and her grandmother. I think her whole family died multiple times while she lived at Maple Street.
Yes. Oh, she was the best, right? I think her mom lived with her for a while, actually. She was a provider of childcare. She was kind of a helper. I mean, even she moved out. She couldn't take Shamika's excuses anymore at some point. I think we had about 6 months of excuses with her. I mean, she was one of our earliest tenants.
Yeah,
so
this is our second property we ever owned.
Yeah.
Low-income duplex in the Silver Springs neighborhood.
Yeah.
I think rent was like $600 a month for a 2-1, something like
cheap.
that. It was cheap, yeah. It included water, they just had to pay electric. And, it wasn't the Taj Mahal, but it was necessary, blue-collar, low-income housing.
Yeah, it was Shamika who called us about wood rats, if I'm not mistaken.
Wood rats, yes.
That was the wood rat woman. And I get this call, because at this particular time, I had the tenant phone. That was before we actually had multiple phones. I had the tenant phone. I was
Metro PCS.
Yeah, Metro PCS. I mean, that was sweet. Anyway, I get this call, and it was like, I have wood rats! And and this was it. I just heard this woman shrieking over the phone that wood rats are coming out of her house. I'm like, wood rats? I'm like, how is that even possible? I don't even know what a wood rat is. Now, since then, I know what a wood rat is. I've got some that live in my forested area, and they build this dome nest near the shores of riverbanks. They're kind of like little hamsters. They're really cute, This woman did not have wood rats, right?
Is that a cross between a beaver and a raccoon, or what is that?
Wood rat? I don't know what's the cross of. But if I saw a wood rat coming out of my walls, I would be like, that's kind of cute, So this was not kind of cute. This woman goes into her house, evidently. When we finally get there, I think this is the memory chase, but she's like, they're coming out of my dryer vent. I'm like, what? What's coming out of your dryer vent? So we go in and detach the dryer vent, and this nest of possums just falls out. Possums. I mean, they're gods. They're proof that God has a sense of humor, right? These things fly out of the wall, and they're all attached to their mom, and they're all their eyes are closed, and they got these jagged teeth, and they're hissing. I mean, these just things, they're ah! When you see them, it's like a horror movie.
Like that scene in Ghostbusters.
Yeah. I was like, I get it, Shamika. You've got wood rats. I mean, you got possums is what she had. And I don't know how, I guess they crawled into the soffit probably, lived in the attic, crawled down the dryer vent. Yeah. I'm like, do you not use your dryer? Surely they process of the heat. Maybe they're attracted to the heat and the lint.
Maybe they're eating the lint. I don't know. Maybe they were lint rats.
Anyway, she stayed in the property even after the wood rat episode.
Wow. Yeah, she did. And what's funny is you've got things like that living in your dryer vent, but the second you walk into one of those duplexes, you get the smell of money.
Yeah.
If you don't know what the smell of money is, You should get yourself a concoction of like Fabuloso and fried chicken and curry
And wood rats.
Yeah, mix it all together, get a good whiff of that, because that is the smell of money.
It is. I mean, every investor, I think, listening to this podcast knows what we're talking about, you know? And it's a fragrance that is remarkably consistent. I mean, like, multiple homes I go to, they have that exact same smell.
I think they sell it at Dollar General.
It might be a fragrance.
I don't know.
It might be a fragrance. Yeah, you spray in the air.
It's a candle.
It's a candle. There's like one of them. Anyway, so they all have it. It's a very common smell. And, you know, it's just like, obviously, we're laughing a little bit here, but certainly people live at different standards of living. And, you know, personal hygiene and home hygiene and things like that are just not consistent across the market. You try to educate and change that sort of stuff as a landlord with a social conscience. You really do. You want to help out. You see that sort of thing. You don't want people to live that way. You try to be really responsive to their needs and their desires for sanitation and hygiene and all those other things. But many folks, that's just how they do life, right? And you can't change all that much about your renters. As socially aware as you want to be, as much as you want to educate and provide assistance and support for them, I think the takeaway for me in all of this was some people are just this way. It's just the way they're going to live. And the system is set up not for me to preach to them or try to even change them, but just to have a way to deal with the reality that some people are going to take advantage of rent payments and they're not going to keep their house very well in the meantime. So deal with it, right? It's one of those dirty realities of owning a rental property. You can freak out about it all day. You can lose sleep over it, or you can just deal with it. I choose the latter. We tried the freak out one, and it did not help.
No, not at all. You know, it's funny you bring that up, too, because, you know, obviously we are conscious of, you know, different income levels and demographics throughout the city, you know, do things and live in certain ways that they're comfortable with. Despite any efforts to help them sometimes, despite the availability of aid programs and welfare and other things, sometimes they just don't choose the right way. They take the wrong path in life over and over again. They end up where they're at. And sometimes they turn a blind eye to good help. And so it's funny how over the years, you do get a little hardened to that. You know, you start out compassionate. You've got these bleeding heart tenants and you want to try and help them. And then you get 5 years in, and you get 7 years in, and 10 and 15 years in, and you've seen this over and over and over again in certain areas of town where you feel like all of these people went to the same seminar. You know, they have very little ambition. They're living off of welfare and, you know, child supplements because they're all single mothers with multiple children by multiple fathers. They're doing what they do to get by, you know, and they have talent, they have ability, they're not dumb people. They just choose not to apply themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's almost a cultural thing in some of the communities around town. And it's obvious when you go in to where they live or you see things on the news that happen in these neighborhoods because, you know, they've been dealt a certain hand in life that makes it harder for them to achieve success the way some of us have. But when you don't see them taking advantage of opportunities put in front of them, and you don't see them taking advantage of help and assistance and other things that come their way, you start to get a little jaded toward that. You know, you start to think, well, I think they like living like this. Why are we trying to change it? They don't want it to change. And there's nothing we can do to help them.
Yeah, and I think that is a very important learning curve for a new landlord. You know, you might think, wow, this property is too good to be true. This price is great. I should buy it. You know, I can be better. I can change this and make this a profitable investment property because I'm going to help in a different way. I think it's important for you to know your own limitations and to not believe that you can alter a generational problem. Right, as a landlord, you can have the best intentions, the most compassionate processes, the best system, but fundamentally changing some things are going to take more than just you have to offer, and it's probably not your business objective either. So stick to your knitting. If you know what your business objective is, the kinds of homes you're trying to buy, If you know the kinds of tenant problems you typically are comfortable dealing with, don't necessarily break that plan, that strategy that you already have set just because a great deal shows up. That great deal might be great because it's got some complexity to it on the tenant side. Yeah. And I think we experienced that. There are many times where we would buy investment properties in the early days, and every time you go to buy an investment property, I promise you, the former landlord will have an awesome rent roll. I mean, the tenants pay their rent every month. In full, no late fees. You're like, this is amazing. I'm going to buy this property. It's going to spit out money like an ATM machine every month, right? So you buy the property, and then it's like, what happened? The tenants are gone, right? Or the tenants immediately default. And you're like, but you were so good for the landlord. Well, draw your own conclusions on what actually happened there. Maybe there was a little bit of fabrication in the rent roll production before you bought the home. Or maybe the landlord, allowed things to remain status quo without kicking the tenant out so he could sell the property occupied. But what we discovered was that on many types of properties, you need to assume that you're going to have to evict the very first month. You need to assume that tenant's going to be gone the very first time they have to pay rent, because that's just kind of what you should expect in those areas. So we call it like the tenant disappearing act, right? And because it almost always happens, you're like, they were so nice during your inspections, and the house looked so good. I don't know how it got that good, but someone must have helped them. And then you show up the day of ownership or the day to pick up rent, and it's a new tenant. It's an angry tenant. It's an empty property. Boy, that's something to just get used to. Experience that reality.
My favorite footnote that's never on the rent roll and never written in the lease is, oh, wait, I was told I got the first 3 months free.
Yes.
You remember that? Like,
oh, yes.
Oh, this guy's paying above market rent? Oh, but he thinks he's getting the first 3 months free. So he paid a deposit in 1 month to get in. The next 3 months are free.
That's right.
Oh, man.
Not in the lease. Not a footnote on the rent roll, but it was a sweetheart deal he got with a handshake from the seller of the property.
Yeah, well, you can't even know that. I mean, because these sellers of the properties are going to do everything they can to try and sell this property, right? Including find the bigger fool, right, who will buy it without diligence, the correct diligence.
Especially in the low-income areas. Yeah. And I think, just taking one step back, too, I think one of the best ways, especially as a landlord in a lower-income area, one of the best things you can do for yourself and for the tenants that you have to deal with is enforce the rules. Hold them accountable, because very few people in their life are holding them accountable. And you have every legal right to hold them accountable to what's in the lease, and that's your safety net financially, is that this tenant has agreed to abide by these rules. Hold them accountable. Don't let them slide. If they don't have rent paid on the due date, 3-day notice immediately. You've got to stick to a regimented plan so they know that you mean business. And you remember, this was part of our problem, right, is learning that over the years, that, hey, look, there's no more grace. It's like, hey, rent's due on the 5th. If it's not there on the 6th, you're getting the 3-day notice, and we will evict you. Mm-hmm. And once the tenant knows that, they are much more inclined to try and pay that rent on time. But if they think there's lenience to the 15th or the end of the month or whatever, every month that you let them get away without obeying the rules is another month of a headache for you. And it's just going to keep you in a headache until you are hardcore and stick to the rules.
Yeah, while you were saying all that, I was trying to think of, how many times have we given grace to a renter and, who is substantially behind on their rent, and it worked out, right? That tenant caught up, got themselves in a good position, and, we're happy again. And I'm thinking you could count the number of those tenants on one hand, right? And it's probably because they got a big tax return or some big aid program came in and paid. But the majority of renters, when they fall behind, unfortunately, are just not going to be able to catch up. Too many other areas of their life are also behind at the same time that they've defaulted on their house. And think about it this way. Their house is the most important thing in their life. If they're willing to shortchange their shelter payment, well, they've probably been shortchanging a dozen other things already too, and it's compounding in a very aggressive way. They're just not going to be able to get ahead of it. So don't be a victim. You're already a victim of that reality. Get out of it as soon as you can, and don't offer more and more grace, because unfortunately it's probably not going to work out.
Yeah, and this is not what this podcast is about. I'm sure we'll get into this at another episode, but if you screen somebody and you see they owe Aaron's Rents a bunch of money, or they owe Spectrum a bunch of money, That's exactly what has happened. They have robbed Peter to pay Paul their entire life. They've never been able to catch up, and they're going to be a headache for you.
Yeah,
so
true. That's true.
That's a free one for today.
I want to go back. So we prefaced this entire conversation, and you were saying don't buy wrong.
Right.
You know, and then you were talking about, looking at these properties, these duplexes, they might be, for a favorable purchase price, and then looking at these rent rolls, and, it just reminds me that I guess the real world doesn't happen on Excel spreadsheets, right? I heard this quote recently, and it was like, more fiction's been written in Excel than any teen fiction book.
Yeah, that's true.
But
That is absolutely true, right? I mean, you see that every day on like a Wall Street investment prospectus, right? I mean, like I'm guessing about what's going to happen.
yeah.
For sure.
Well, that's why when we screen tenants, to me, after years of experience in this and seeing people at all levels of income, of all backgrounds, of all races, all of that, the most important thing to me is the smell test. I don't care what their credit score is. I don't care what their bank account says. I don't care any of that stuff. Usually, the best way to tell whether someone's going to be a good tenant, and I don't mean just a person that's going to pay rent on time, but is going to follow the rules, not be a pain in the rear, not, be belligerent and all that stuff, you got to meet them face to face. And you got to have a quick chat, and in that chat, you got to try and discern that. And sometimes you can't really discern that very well if you don't have this kind of experience in dealing with people like that. But it's important. Don't ever rent properties to people you haven't met face to face. Bad idea.
That's right. And of course, that requires a couple of things. Every landlord must have a very clearly articulated qualifying criteria for their renters. Because what we're not saying here is that meet someone and if you don't like the color of their skin or their gender, you're not renting to them. What we're saying is you're presenting to every renter your qualifying criteria, what they must do to live in your properties. And as you ask them those questions, you're confirming that they're telling the truth, right? Do you indeed have bankruptcies? Do you actually have felonies? Do you have income that can qualify you to rent this home? These are objective things. But if you don't meet someone, it's very easy for them to falsify their documentation. And so that if you do all this electronically, you're going to have that experience far more often. So don't put yourself in that spot. Do the legwork you need to do to appropriately screen your renters and make sure it's objectively stated in your qualifying criteria. That will protect you, it'll protect them, and I guarantee it will result in less defaults.
Have you guys ever dealt with Section 8, and what do you guys think about it?
Yeah, we have. We've dealt a lot with Section 8. In fact, wasn't Shamika on Section 8 at one point?
Maybe, yes.
I think that says it all right there.
Okay.
It's like, here's the deal. Section 8 is a double-edged sword, right? A lot of landlords want Section 8 because they view it as guaranteed rent. Mm-hmm. I will tell you it's anything but guaranteed rent, okay? There is usually a tenant portion that is not guaranteed. The bigger that tenant portion, obviously the less guaranteed the money is. The other thing you're doing with Section 8 is you're opening yourself up to inspections by, I forget what the standard is now. It's been so long since we've dealt with Section 8, but there's a standard they go by, some kind of housing code, and the real danger for a landlord is that the tenant can damage the property, bring the property below that standard, and then you as the landlord are required to repair it at your own cost in order to keep receiving the Section 8 payments. If you don't, they will abate the rent and you won't be receiving anything. So we made a choice a long time ago to shy away from people with vouchers. Now we're not allowed to. We have to accept them because of the new laws and regs that have come into place. But we shy away from them because of all the regulation and really liability that situation brings to you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of landlords are really touting the fact that the Section 8 program now pays well, and it does. There's been some adjustments to the Section 8 compensation standards to help us deal with the appreciating rent rate realities that we're in a lot of our areas. So Section 8 pays more money than it used to. But, what we always tell our landlords is we're going to find the best renter for you, whether that's a Section 8 renter or a self-pay renter. We're going to screen them aggressively or rigorously, and we're going to find the one that will most qualify for your home. And we are not restrictive at all of Section 8 applicants but we almost never have to use a Section 8 applicant. And I think that's a good thing for the owners until the system will allow us to be able to appropriately address tenant abuse within the Section 8 systems. And that until you're not really dealing with two bosses, right? Mm-hmm. That's the tenant who and the bureau or the Section 8 authority who can abate and withhold their rent. They can not only withhold their rent, they can go back into your bank account and suck out their estate agency. So they can suck out multiple months' rent if they determine that whatever the problem is that the tenant's complaining about has gone past for multiple months, right? And again, maybe you didn't even cause that problem. Maybe the tenant caused it themselves. They can suck that money out. And that's just not a place that we want our owners to be vulnerable in. And so we choose to pursue all applicants, and we don't really have to do as much Section 8 these days.
Yeah, just not all money is equal. Mm-hmm. Or not all money is created equal, I guess you might say. A lot of strings attached to receiving Section 8, and I agree. Everything Peter said is true, and it's unfortunate because people on the voucher program, most of the time, not all of the time. I mean, there's a reason why the Tampa Housing Authority has been in our federal investigations for the past 20 years, and 3 or 4 of their CEOs have been fired or put in jail over fraudulent operations of Section 8. I mean, it's just a program riddled with problems that they've tried to recently fix. And hopefully they're making some good improvements to it because there are legitimate people that need the vouchers that would be great tenants out there. Unfortunately, they're screened behind this dark cloud of bad experience and corruption that has plagued that program here in our local market.
Sounds like just like every state agency.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so I was trying to think back, Chase. We talked about like the Tenant Disappearing Act, and I was trying to think of like our first duplex scenario where we had that like police invasion. Was that kind of a Tenant Disappearing Act, or were those two different experiences there?
I think the Disappearing Act maybe happened right before the police invaded. I don't know.
Probably true, right?
I just remember getting a call from a neighbor saying that the door was missing.
Oh, that's right.
It was like the week after Christmas.
Yeah.
And it's like the door's missing on the unit. I was like, what? The door is missing? Can it be, really? I mean, like... So we go over there, and sure enough, the place is wide open. I mean, littered with stuff. Clothes, toys. I mean, it literally looked like they were having a giant slumber party on one hand, and that their kids had just opened their Christmas presents and left them in the floor. I mean, it was a sad thing.
Yeah.
You could tell the kids had been living there, and that they left in a hurry and left all their belongings and all their toys. The windows were broken out, the door was broken down, there was fingerprint dust everywhere, and I'm not even sure what the guy had done. I don't know that we even cared at that point. All we knew was we had a big mess on our hands to clean up, and, partially the responsibility of the wonderful sheriff's department. We're not going to blame them for it, but they did leave us with a big rehab.
Yeah, there was blood on the walls.
There was, that's right.
And I also learned this lesson, which... I hope this is a PG podcast, but this duplex was very early on for us, where I first discovered that for some reason, there are people who just cannot get their condoms into a trash can. They just throw them everywhere. I mean, like baseboards, corners of wherever, and I was like, this is like the worst thing I've ever seen. But since then, I find it all the time. At certain demographics of properties, I'm like, here we go. Evidently, this is like epidemic, right? So I was horrified at this particular property because I found a number of these little happy presents around.
They usually come with a kit. It's usually a kit with a used one of those, some fake eyelashes, and hair extensions.
Yeah,
they're usually all found together in the same place.
It's all mixed in. It's like a soup.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's awful.
We cleaned this property ourselves. This is back in the day where we were like elbow grease and like let's do this ourselves. And so I think me and Chase, thank goodness it was a Christmas holiday. We were like, this is a fun thing to do on Christmas. And we didn't have kids yet, so I remember being there like full gloves and Lysol and like bleach, and our wives pulled up and they were like they brought me a Coke, which at that time I drank. I was like, put it down, way back there. Don't come close to the property.
Hazardous materials over here.
Yeah, we were like wrapping, tape and yellow tape everywhere. That was bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember if this is one of those properties or not, but we had some friends of ours who were just starting out. They were still in school, and they were doing odd jobs to make money, and we hired them to clean out some of these places for us every now and then.
Oh, yes.
And I can't remember if this is one of those properties that we put them on, but I hope it wasn't.
Oh, please no.
Yeah.
I can't believe they would ever come back.
Yeah.
If we put them on this one. This property was a consistent problem for us. I mean, it was just one of these properties that we bought, and every tenant we got for that property was that way. And it was just a street that, it was a poisonous street, and we were unable to get ahead of that tenant reality there.
Yeah, it was in an area of town called Suitcase City, and, you know, Suitcase City is a great location if you look at it from a macro level in Tampa Bay. Incredible, real close to the University of South Florida, close to the VA hospital, Advent Hospital, close to interstates, close to lots of good transportation, retail and restaurants and all of that. But it was the victim of bad zoning decisions made by the county back in the 80s. And so you've got this checkerboarded neighborhood where you've got a mix of mobile homes, single family, duplexes, apartment complexes, corner stores. I mean, you name it, it's in Suitcase City. And its name is derived from the fact that so many people are transient in that area. They're in and they're out. You know, it's like a landing place for people until they can get back on their feet. And so it makes it a neighborhood of high crime, of low income, of, you know, shady things going on. And unfortunately, that's where we started our low income multifamily asset career, is on 23rd Street, right in the heart of the Suitcase City.
Yeah, we had and it was, some of those streets are still bad today.
Yeah,
we just can't get ahead of them.
There's no fixing it.
No, it's gonna require, you know, eminent domain or some major community wide redevelopment.
Yeah,
which is not where we are right now. We have had some properties in that area do well. One of them though was like, I just remember. We have a video of this. I mean, it has something like 100,000 views on YouTube. You shot it, right? Did you shoot this video?
I did. I think Brad uploaded it to his YouTube channel.
Oh, man. What were the details of it? Because I wasn't there to experience the beauty of this one.
So this is a great example of how you can't screen people effectively sometimes. Because here we had a guy living in an I guess it's an efficiency apartment. Maybe it was a loft at an apartment complex in North Tampa. He had a really good job working at a brand new Holiday Inn on Bush Boulevard. And I think he was like either like, you know, customer service, front desk kind of thing, wore like a nice shirt and a tie to work every day. Yet we walked into his apartment one day after it was discovered by one of our maintenance men. And I have never seen a floor move before, but the floor was moving.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, if you get squeamish talking about cockroaches,
oh,
you might want to turn the volume down now. Because I have never seen so many German cockroaches in my entire life. And to boot, the guy was sleeping on a mattress on the floor. And you know how sometimes little pests like that leave evidence that they've been somewhere? So the evidence was in his pillow and on his mattress that he slept on every night.
Oh.
Roaches by the millions.
Are you serious?
I am totally serious.
Are we talking like Indiana Jones Temple of Doom?
Kind of.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. I'd say that, yeah.
That's my greatest nightmare.
It was revolting beyond description. I mean, the guy is like heaving off the balcony of the apartment. I'm watching it now. My skin is crawling.
You found it.
I found the one because, you know, some of these things take multiple treatments to get on top of. And so the first treatment was horrible. But the second, I mean, the second time I went in to revisit this property, it's still teeming with roaches. They're living inside the drywall and the air vents, and they're coming out. And it's Indiana Jones, full scale Indiana Jones, revolting. I think probably one of the more horrific realizations in some of this is like the guy who lives this way is the guy who sometimes is serving you at a restaurant. Right?
Oh.
Or, you know.
Okay, let's not go there. Let's not go there, please.
Which restaurants?
Someone think about it.
Oh. So you're saying this? How did he possibly live in that condition? That's it.
I have no earthly idea. We asked him that question when he showed up to the unit, and the only thing I remember about that encounter was that he was not alarmed by this at all.
Yeah, that's right. He was kind of numb to it. It was
Yeah,
very
what?
strange.
I'm not sure how he grew
Maybe he
up
was
or where
breeding
he
these
was
things.
raised, but maybe they were his pets. I have no idea. The guy was not alarmed whatsoever. In fact, when the manager of the apartment complex told him he was going to have to move out so that they could do heavy treatments to this unit, he was upset about it. He did not want to go anywhere.
He had named his cockroaches. He was. I'm reminded now.
He's like, for just a couple cockroaches? Come on.
Yeah, don't freak out, right?
Oh, man.
I'm thinking he's barefoot in the video.
Yes,
walking
he is
around.
barefoot.
Do you remember that?
Yes, he's barefoot.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that was beyond revolting.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I don't recall him being like,
So you have a video of it?
Oh, I'm watching it right now.
I don't
it's
recall
showing how
him
many
being
there are?
intoxicated or high or anything like that. He was totally sober when we encountered him.
Yeah.
For our
yeah.
more strong-stomached viewers, can we put a link in the bio to
Oh
this?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We'll put that there.
Oh, yeah,
we'll put
we'll-
that there. Poor
We'll
guy.
hook that up. I wish we had more pictures of this
I'm
stuff. but-
50-50 if I want to see it.
Yeah.
Curiosity is killing me right now. I want to see it.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
But
Yeah.
I want to hold in my lunch as well.
Yeah, we'll
So-
put it. We'll put it in there.
Okay.
I think it was the same community that we actually had one of our first DBs,
Yes.
right? Dead bodies.
Yeah.
For those of you who watch CSIs and
The exact
You know,
same
you talk about
problem.
the smell of money. I think the smell of this unit and the one where we found the deceased gentleman, you know, that's a whole different kind of smell. That is a smell where you hang over the balcony. You know,
Yeah.
you're not taking this in very well.
I've heard, this
Right.
is just, hearsay, but I've heard that it has a dead body has a very distinct smell that you can't get out of your mind. Like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, it smells like nothing else, right?
When you smell it for the first time, you know when you smell it again. Sometimes it takes a while to get that smell out of your nose.
Really, yeah.
In this case, you know, can you imagine a loft apartment with a tiny spiral staircase that's maybe 20 inches wide, and there's a loft where a tenant would sleep, and you've got a gentleman in excess of 500 pounds who someone comes to do a welfare check on and determine he's deceased. Don't really know what happened to the man, but he was elderly, and not being able to get him down the stairs. What do? You call the fire department. I mean, and they bring a ladder truck and a hoist, and you remove the window from the loft, and they hoist him out of the building.
Man.
I mean, I think he had probably been dead for 3, 4, 5 days or so before anybody actually found him. Because usually welfare checks aren't triggered for sometimes up to a week.
Right.
You know, when people die like that without any close family around or anything. So sad situation for the man. But I mean, I have never encountered anything like this before, where someone was so large they could not get him out of a unit in a normal way, and they had to call the fire department and take extreme measures.
Yeah, that was extreme. There was a lot of contamination, like hazmat contamination that we encountered for a while. We were managing at a very large scale. We became very close friends with a company. They used to advertise, right?
Yeah.
They advertised on billboards, which was bizarre. And it was Deacon Spalding, right? Was the name of this company. And their big giant billboards would say something like "undiscovered death." Some other kind of corruption, and 3 things all advertised on the
Bodily
billboard.
fluid, I
Bodily,
think,
yeah,
instead.
yeah, I think so. And they had this dude in a hazmat mask, and and he breaking through hazmat tape to clean up these messes. She was later on some kind of a reality TV show, because what she would encounter all the time at her job when she would go into an apartment and find some horrific meth houses was one of the things they cleaned up. These heavily chemically contaminated units that you'd find in managing properties. I mean, these are people's homes. This is where the best things in the world are happening to people, and the worst things in the world are happening to people. And again, it's one of those things that, as a landlord and investor, it is something you just got to get used to. You're going to walk into a property one day and find something pretty horrific, and you're going to pray for the people in there and hope that the things worked out for them, and then you're going to kind of put on your hazmat gloves and get to work and deal with the realities of life. But that was a hard one, and a great vendor to have in your Rolodex. You need a decontamination specialist for the event that this happens.
We've had 2 men die on us. One was a drug overdose in a mobile home, where we had to call in that same company to clean that up as well.
Right.
But yeah, it's an unfortunate event when it happens, but it is something you'll have to deal with every now and then, especially when you manage at scale or you own at scale. You're going to encounter pretty much every human experience you can imagine. And we had talked a little bit earlier in this show about some of the tendencies you inherit, and to pivot a little bit from this discussion, maybe we'll just clean it up a little bit, go back to like the humorous side. We bought this great property from a guy going through a divorce on Wineball Avenue. And little did we know the gem of a man that lived in the back unit.
What?
You know how hard it is to find handymen? I mean, especially like in a housing boom, when everybody's working. I mean, when you find a handyman that's worth his salt, I mean, it's like gold, right? Well, we inherited one with this property. Good old Angel Vieira.
Oh,
man, what can we say about that guy?
Yeah, what a trip, right? I mean, I'm trying to put together all the memories now, and there's so many, right? I mean, I think he was probably good back in the day, and he was probably good at a certain level of properties. But if I'm not mistaken, I mean, like, he kind of fit the bill of most handymen, right, that you find in your properties, and that's like, he's not really that good at anything, right? And he's like substance dependent, and on multiple different fronts. I mean, we were like, hey, you're a handyman? Great, we got 1,000 jobs for you. And so we like started sending him work orders. And I mean, I think, what percentage of them were done correctly? Like 0.
I don't know.
I mean, duct tape, big stuff, great stuff, black tape. I mean, it's like things were poorly finished. You'd offer him like discounts on his rent or whatever to get stuff done, and seemed to be unable to get anything done. I'm just trying to. The stories that we had from him could go on forever.
Yeah, I think like the red flags I'd say is beware if you buy a property with a resident handyman. And here's some of the ways you identify this guy. You might be calling him the handy con.
That's right.
Like he hangs out in the parking lot at Home Depot, looking for unsuspecting old ladies that need ceiling fans hung in their homes or toilets plunged,
Oh, yeah.
He smells like alcohol 24/7, maybe even also smokes, cigarettes or other things. He's usually late to rise and late to go down at the end of the day. And he always has a lady of the night in and out of his unit.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Especially when you're only 2 blocks from Nebraska Avenue.
Right, and his name was Angel.
Yes.
How ironic, right?
What an angel he was.
I know. Oh. He wasn't the only guy we had like this, and we had several handymen who lived in their units, and this never worked out. I think Dave was another one who lived in...
Yes.
Did Dave live in the same building for a while?
He did. He took Angel's unit when he moved out.
He did. Oh, we traded one handyman for another. And Dave was a little better. We seem to find sometimes that these guys are good for a time, but then as soon as the next squeeze comes around or the next, problem comes around in their life, which they happen all the time, he's off the wagon again, right? And so you can't, even if you get 1 or 2 good deals out of him, you can't trust him, you can't depend on him. And that was the case with Dave. I mean, this unit just seemed to attract handymen. But they're everywhere. They're always going to want to sell you their services. You need to very kindly tell them no. If you get into the situation where you're paying your tenant to be a handyman at your property, they never develop the habit of paying their rent, right? In full. And they're always going to view you as a source of money. And so if then they can't pay their rent, well, it's because you didn't have a job for them, right? So the blame game starts. So avoid that like the plague.
Yeah, it's basically a line of credit.
Yeah.
If your handyman's living in your property, just be prepared to be a bank.
That's
and
right.
To finance their lifestyle until you get tired of it and they move out. It seems like a great idea, though.
It does.
Hey, I can just have a guy, he'll trade rent for work, we can get stuff done at a subsidy. He's right there, so if it's at this property, he can be Johnny on the spot 24/7.
Yeah.
Just, man.
I think it's only worked out for us one time.
Yeah, once.
Once. And we have had a consistently good relationship with one person that meets this profile. But other than that, it's a problem. Avoid it.
Yep, definitely. And, it's best if you start out working with somebody when they don't live in your property. If they turn out to be really good, and they're not suspect to these things we just mentioned, booze and other things and women, then at that point consider maybe that moving them into one of your apartments is a good idea, or one of your homes, because the relationship can be mutually beneficial if they're a hard worker and they know that this is a job. You know, this is not like a subsidized living arrangement. They have a job to do, and the rent's got to be paid no matter what happens. But boy, we've had some guys in our past, you know, that have really educated us on how to be con men.
Yeah, it's like I'm getting PTSD just by going through this list with you right now. I mean, some of these, I remember distinctly not being able to sleep some nights.
Yeah.
You know, because different people handle these things different ways. And, you know, for me, there was some stress connected with all of these situations.
So my first con job that I remember, we were managing properties for a friend of ours. And this guy had a house in Seminole Heights. And I remember I didn't have any connections at the time. I was just starting out in property management. And this house needed to be turned over, if you will. That's when a tenant moves out, you go in and make repairs, get ready for the next tenant. And there was a neighborhood handyman named Johnny. And Johnny came over and somehow, you know, convinced me that this house needed $8,000 worth of work. At the time, I thought, hey, that sounds about right. You know, $8,000 worth of work. Yeah, sure, go ahead and start. Boy, man, the guy that owned the house wasn't too happy about that. The $8,000 of work was really like $4,000 of work. And I didn't know any better. You know, got educated. Thankfully, I didn't have to pay the difference. But there's a lot of hands-on, you know, school of hard knocks education that goes on with some of this stuff. And that's why a lot of people have to hire a seasoned property manager. They've been through the hard knocks. You know, they know the handymen that work and the ones that don't. You know, they know the good vendors to hire. They can save you so much headache in regard to that. Fortunately, you know, 17 years in, we're looking back laughing about Angel Vieira.
Yeah.
But at the time, who knows how much money that guy cost us?
A lot.
Thousands and thousands of dollars in lost rent and undone jobs, time and money and effort and, you know, mental anguish. Mental anguish is probably the highest priced item when you're dealing with these guys.
It's very high. And as a property manager, you must develop, as an investor, you must develop thick skin. You must develop the ability to kind of not let these guys interfere with your life. Otherwise, why bother? Get an investment manager and invest in equities, right? Because the personal impact of dealing with these things can really take a toll on you. So don't let that happen, right? Don't let it interfere with your family, with your peace. Otherwise, it's just not worth it. And, you know, or develop the ability to do that in a professional way.
Well, you know, we briefly mentioned in the beginning that, you know, when you speak to would-be landlords or would-be investors, they're terrified of collecting rents or of late rents or of any one of these, you know, walking into the temple of doom. But I think that's one of the huge selling points for getting professional management, right? I mean, the way I always looked at it was I always preferred to have a professional distance, I guess, for legal reasons and whatever else. Like, I wouldn't want to be dealing with the tenants if I directly owned the real estate. That's just how I looked at it.
Even if you take that approach and you hire a professional manager, which I would highly recommend, you know, especially when you don't know much, you need to continually, as an owner, be educating yourself on how a home works or how an apartment complex works or whatever asset you have. Because it'll only pay dividends for you down the road. If you see bills coming over for maintenance items or you see property managers handling something a certain way and you have questions about it, ask. You know, learn the process that's going on with the manager. That way you're more educated as an owner. You may not want to do any of that stuff yourself, and we wouldn't recommend you do it yourself starting out. I mean, we learned the hard way, and we lost a lot of money in the process. It was an expensive education for the first 3, 4, 5 years that we did this. We're in a different position now where, you know, we're pretty seasoned at it. We've seen a lot, as you can tell. Yeah. So we have a lot to offer. You know, people that are just starting out or don't really have a comfort level yet with dealing with tenants or maintenance or any of these other possible, you know, nightmare scenarios that can pop up when you're dealing with people.
But yeah, and also, you know, being able to leverage a decade of experience, I mean, that's huge too.
It's huge. Yeah. It's huge. Just think of it this way. Property management is expensive. It's not cheap, right? And some months your property manager is going to do nothing. But when the roach infestation or the dead body comes, you're prepaying in a lot of ways for that property manager to handle, to have the expertise to handle that really, really big problem that literally will steal your night's sleep for days, right? And so some months, it's not going to be a whole lot of work for them. But when it comes time to use them for these kinds of situations, they are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well,
That's it. So find a good manager. You know, if you're in Tampa Bay, I recommend HomeProp. We do a pretty good job.
We know one or two.
And we can help you avoid all these nightmare scenarios that we've lived through.
It's like, do not rent to Angel Vieira. What? He's been applying to your property?
Yeah, exactly.
We've met him already, right?
oh man.
If you own a complex, have routine pest control.
Yeah.
Walk into a unit. Those are unfortunate cookies you're stepping on.
That's right. That's right.